Everybody. This is the meeting of Brooklyn Community Board's Housing and Land Use Committee, this evening on May 10th, 2023. And we have two presentations this evening. Hello, everybody. I'm Greg Alvarez, co-chair, along with Talisha Saintville. And we have, again, the embarrassment of riches of three fellows for us this year to study various aspects of CB14 and housing and land use. And so tonight, I'm going to be introducing our first fellow, who is Morgan Ruther, who is going to be presenting in connection with our continuing discussion of the City of Yes text amendments. And her focus in her studies has been the zoning amendment related to carbon neutrality. The DCP has just issued the actual text amendments as well. So look forward to another presentation that we'll actually be receiving from DCP, and I believe that's on June 8th. So there'll be more information about that. But tonight we have Morgan's study, and she's going to walk us through and take us through all of the aspects of what we should be paying attention to when we can dig into these new text amendments. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Morgan. Please reintroduce yourself to all of us, and we look forward to hear your presentation this evening. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Greg, for the intro, but I'll go ahead and give a little more about myself. My name is Morgan Ruther. I'm currently a graduate student at Columbia University studying urban planning and real estate development. And yeah, I'm really excited to get started on my presentation. I'm having a minor technical difficulty opening the file, but if you bear with me for just one moment, I should be able to start pretty shortly.
Sure, no problem.
Sorry about that. Okay. Just make this full screen. Should be good to go. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Are we good to go? Great.
We're ready to go.
So yeah, I already introduced myself, but just to give a little bit extra context to this presentation, the past few weeks have been really huge in the world of New York City sustainability and resiliency. 2 weeks ago, the city made a huge announcement that Governor's Island would be transformed into a huge 400,000 square foot campus for climate solutions and research. And on that same day, the Adams administration released, and DCP released, the actual zoning text amendments that Greg just mentioned that are under the initiative known as Zoning for Climate Neutrality, which is under the broader City of Yes initiative. So it's clear that there's a ton of political momentum to move these climate forward policies forward, and ensuring that these policies are enacted in ways that are considerate of local impacts and that are implemented in a way that can be effective at the local level is really what the focus of my study has been over the past few months. Let's see if I can change my next slide. Oops. Oh, sorry, we jumped forward pretty far. Hang on a second. Sorry, everyone. Okay, so the agenda for my presentation, I'm going to give a brief background on the City of Yes by sharing some slides from DCP's most recent public information sessions in case there's anyone on the call that wasn't able to attend. I'm going to give a quick overview of the work plan for my project and the methodology that led me to the specific initiatives that I focused on. And then I'm going to give an overview of some of the zoning reform proposals under Zoning for Carbon Neutrality that are most relevant for Community Board 14. So in June 2022, Mayor Eric Adams announced his administration's plan to implement new zoning tools to support small businesses, create affordable housing, and promote decarbonization across New York City. This plan, also known as City of Yes, seeks to accomplish these goals through 3 zoning reform initiatives. These initiatives are zoning for carbon neutrality, zoning for economic opportunity, and zoning for housing opportunity. And the Department of City Planning has announced a tentative timeline to implement these, and carbon neutrality is the first of these initiatives to be implemented. Sorry, we've got like a slight delay here between slides. Okay, so as I mentioned, the zoning for carbon neutrality proposal, which I'm going to refer to as ZCN moving forward, entered the formal public review process about 2 weeks ago on April 24th. So now there's a 60-day review period that will run through July, where the proposal will be shared with all 59 New York City community boards. And the ultimate city council vote will occur in October of this year. The broader context of ZCN, outside of its association with City of Yes, is a broader need to update New York City zoning code to account for advances in sustainable technologies and building science that are needed to accomplish our carbon neutrality goals. So the Zone Green upgrade in 2012 was the last significant sustainability-driven reform to the zoning resolution, and a lot has changed since then. And as I mentioned previously, there's a lot of the legislative landscape has changed a lot regarding decarbonization, with a number of city and state initiatives that have been implemented since Zone Green. So the Zoning for Carbon Neutrality initiative covers 4 main categories that are energy, transportation, waste, and buildings. And in total, oh God, I'm sorry. And in total, there are 17 text amendment proposals that span the gambit of solar reform, building retrofits, electric vehicle regulations, and waste and water. And it was decided early on that the scope of my project would involve selecting a few of these proposals to focus on that were most relevant to CB14. So the ultimate goals of my project were to identify these zoning changes that were most relevant, then identify where in the district these changes might occur or impact, and then ultimately provide a deep dive analysis and recommendations to inform the board's comments to DCP during this public review period. So super briefly, this is a lot of information, but this is kind of high level, the methodology that informed how my project developed. It's worth noting that DCP has implemented a more transparent public engagement process than previous zoning reform initiatives. So there have been a number of public information sessions that have been hosted over the past few months that have really informed the way that my project developed. But the 3 main buckets involved an initial scoping phase where I collected some background information on the context of the initiative and all of the amendments under the proposal, and workshopped with the CB14 Land Use Committee. Then I went into the research and mapping phase, where I liaisoned with DCP and interviewed a number of zoning experts and conducted geographic analyses that ultimately led to my findings and recommendations. And again, this is just a quick timeline of some of the major milestones that occurred throughout my project. And it's worth noting that I worked pretty closely with Beta NYC to come up with a few methodologies within methodologies to spatially show how some of these proposals might play out in the district. So in thinking about a potential framework to narrow this focus, I first took a look at CB14's top 3 pressing issues identified in this year's district needs assessment. And in particular, the issue of infrastructure resiliency seemed to have a lot of overlap with some of the topics covered in zoning for carbon neutrality. This included issues with flooding, implementing electric vehicle charging stations, and other infrastructure improvement and coordination concerns. To further identify which proposals were most important in CB14, I presented an initial overview of the project at the Housing and Land Use Committee back in December 2022. And some of the community feedback received during this meeting included a need for a map of vulnerable flooding areas, a need for the ZCN initiative to be coordinated with existing DEP initiatives, and a need for the project to focus on initiatives that would impact the entire district. So I decided to start with number 1 and create a map of vulnerable flooding areas. Which is loading. So this map shows, this map uses data from DEP's New York City stormwater map, showing extreme flood within 2080 sea level rise. And then in 2019, CB14 identified the following areas as vulnerable to flooding within the district, which were submitted to DEP. Sorry, I don't know why it's moving so slow.
No, it gives us a chance to look at the map. So
okay. Okay, so there has been little implementation of green infrastructure within the district compared to the rest of the Brooklyn borough. And there are similarly few projects planned or under construction. The stormwater measures under ZCN represent an opportunity then to promote stormwater management within the district and provide this green infrastructure that could address local flooding issues. So yeah, I guess while we're sitting on this, you can, oh, okay, now it's gone. Okay, so then in looking again at the 17 proposals, the first that I chose to focus on, or that I thought was most relevant to some of the issues covered was, I think it's loading. Okay, street trees. So, next slide. So current zoning requires street trees to be installed along new developments and enlargements. However, as drafted, this language does not allow for the implementation of new, more innovative prototypes that DOT and DEP have been developing, such as connected tree beds and rain gardens. The text amendment proposes to update street tree requirements to allow more flexibility so that building owners and developers can actually use connected tree beds and allow for a substitution of one required street tree with a DEP compliant rain garden. And the ultimate goal of this initiative is to promote more stormwater retention and reduce the amount of stormwater that needs to be treated across the city. DCP has stated that the design requirements for high performance tree pits and rain gardens will adhere to the existing standards established by DEP, which was one of the initial concerns when we met back in December, was just that DEP would be involved in coordinating these in the implementation of this green infrastructure. And then in terms of impact, it is estimated that during a rainstorm, each rain garden would be able to collect up to 2,500 gallons of water, which is a significant amount of stormwater. So then back to the district, how could this be used to, how could CB14 harness this proposal to address local issues and promote the adoption of green infrastructure for flood mitigation at scale? Drum roll. So I first took a look at the existing tree canopy within the district, and you can see that there are some areas that are most prone to stormwater flooding lack a good amount of trees and foliage. The next level of my analysis, which is loading, is I took a look at properties where new building permits had been issued since 2019. With the assumption that some of these projects could have been delayed during COVID, could still be in pre-development, and could potentially present an opportunity to incorporate some of this new green infrastructure if this initiative is passed as is in September. So here you can see in black, these are the property lots with DOB permits issued after 2019 that could represent these opportunities for immediate green infrastructure implementation. And my conclusion with this study was that, or for the focus on this proposal, was that promoting awareness of this upcoming zoning change to residents and developers could allow for significant stormwater mitigation infrastructure to be created within the district. Oh, I'm so sorry. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna bring this back up. My Adobe just shut down. It was working perfectly all day. I don't know what happened.
Well, while we have a moment, I'd just like to acknowledge a few folks who have joined us this evening. We have Ken Lazar from New York City DOB, so we thank you for being here, Ken. And we also have Hanif Yazdi from Department of City Planning as well as Borough Planner. So thank you both for listening in and joining us this evening.
Great to be here.
Okay, we're 1 second.
I'll throw out a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Go
okay.
ahead, please.
It's probably more for Sean, but about the time frame, as far as our reviewing everything and putting in a vote for a recommendation. Did I hear that the final vote on this is in October or something?
Community boards have 60 days from the date of certification, which was sometime, oh, maybe Hanif can help me out, was last week-ish?
I'm not sure but I can circle up.
That's okay. I mean, but you know, practically speaking, DCP is actually going to come back to us with the broader a text amendment proposal on June 8th, I believe we've settled on. And then it will be heard. So it will be heard on June 8th and presented to the full board at our June 12th meeting.
And then do we have a July meeting? Forgive me for not knowing.
No, according to the no, we break for July and August. It's
Okay.
the charter breaks.
So then we will vote on this in September?
No, June.
They're coming to present in June, right?
Correct. It's going to be a very quick turnaround.
Yeah, so hi, this is Emily, also from DCP. Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to add that to my name. The text amendment was officially referred out to community boards last week on Tuesday, May 2nd. It's a 60-day review. So the community board clock officially ends on July 3rd, but the CPC vote is tentatively scheduled for August, so community boards could weigh in up until that date, early August.
Yeah, but as DCP knows well, we don't, you know, meet in, no community boards in the city meet in July and August,
Right.
so it's a little squishy. But let's go back. Morgan's back up.
I need 1 more second. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, we have one more question while Morgan's working. It's a question from Elizabeth, so please, by all means.
Hi, yeah. So as I understand it, the rain garden option here is like a more flexible way for new development and new permits potentially to change from doing the traditional street tree to this. But I also know that a lot of our district already has a lot of street trees, and I was just wondering if there's any information on how to potentially change those into rain gardens, or also you know, if there are stretches that don't have street trees but aren't getting otherwise redeveloped, how one could get a street tree or, you know, put in a rain garden adjacent to a property that they owned, if there's any information on that.
It's actually a DEP question. They're not attending tonight, but I can try to get an update from DEP on when CB14 is supposed to be phased into their rain garden expansion.
Right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Just like to acknowledge another attendee this evening. We have Sharon Fuchs from the State Senator Felder's office. So thank you as well for joining us. Okay, we do have one more question while Morgan's working. So Chair Brown, if you'd like to speak, please.
Thank you. Less a question and more of just comment on how developers are compliant with actually planting street trees when they are mandated to do so in front of their new properties. There is very low compliance. In the north of the district, in just a 1 block area, we have at least 8 street trees that were not planted by 2 developments. When I brought that to the attention of Parks via 311, the response was that Parks would assess the site and we can expect a tree in 2 years. So it seems to be that when the developer doesn't do their part in this process, that Parks is taking it over. And Councilmember Rita Joseph has made a commitment to plant trees throughout the district. And so in this area, those tree pits have been filled by trees, presumably by her capital budget to plant them. I just wanted to point that out, that compliance is very low and enforcement is non-existent when it comes to new development and tree planting. So I can't see it changing with this zoning text amendment. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Yeah, in my experience too, I've seen that where it, because the enforcement mechanism seems to fall on Parks, sometimes it does fall through the cracks for sure. That's definite. Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm back up. I'm not going to full screen it. I'm sorry. Every time I do it, it shuts down. But just on that last question, I think that was, super relevant and definitely kind of came up when I was digging into the details of the existing requirements. And yeah, I mean, one, this didn't really fit within the realm of a recommendation per se, but one kind of idea that was really interesting that came out of this exploration was, what if in certain flooding areas it was required that you instead of using street trees, used something more robust like a connected tree bed or a rain garden, and that there was a higher level of compliance. So just, I thought appreciate that last comment. Okay, so anyway, jumping back in, I'm again very sorry. I'm not quite sure what's going on, but hopefully we can get through the rest without a hiccup. So in the same vein as rain gardens, the next initiative that I looked at was the zoning text amendment proposal in regard to porous paving. And for anyone who might on the call that might not be familiar, permeable paving is a type of paving material that allows stormwater to infiltrate immediately back into the ground where it falls. And according to the Conservation Foundation, who conducted a study, permeable pavement that is installed and maintained correctly can percolate between 5.6 and 18.5 gallons of water per minute per square foot, which, similar to street trees, is a significant amount of stormwater retention. And in recent years, DEP and DOT have been studying permeable pavement installation and have done a number of neighborhood pilot projects throughout the city. And through these pilots, DEP found that permeable pavement does have the potential to capture large volumes of stormwater and can be utilized in areas where rain gardens may not be feasible due to siting and design constraints. So diving into the actual text amendment proposal, currently under zoning, permeable paving is permitted by the city to be used instead of asphalt. However, the current zoning text implies that a DOP must review and approve each proposed installation of permeable pavement. And as a result of this ambiguity, the use of it has been disincentivized in many developments in New York City. So the proposed zoning text amendment would revise this language to make it clear that permeable paving is always allowed, with the hope that permeable paving will be more broadly utilized. So this map, so since 2007, New York City zoning code has required parking lots for community facilities to allow permeable pavement where appropriate. And this applies to parking lots with more than 18 spaces or that are larger than 6,000 square feet. So these sites are required to capture stormwater through either perimeter plantings and planting islands or other stormwater retention. So other impervious surfaces in CB14 can also provide opportunities to integrate green infrastructure for stormwater management. And what this map really meaning to show is, if we looked at parking lots that are already required to retain stormwater, perhaps this new permeable pavement clarity could be an option for those sites, as well as other impervious surfaces throughout the district. And then shifting gears a little bit, the last zoning text amendment proposal that I chose to focus on was rooftop solar. Currently, the zoning resolution classifies non-accessory solar generation as a commercial use, and thus it's only permitted in commercial districts. However, this proposal proposes to reclassify this use as renewable energy generation and permit it as of right in all residential districts. So as you can see here, non-accessory solar is currently only permitted in commercial and manufacturing districts, and there are very few of these areas within CB14. Under the new zoning text amendment proposal, non-accessory would be permitted in all districts. But it is worth noting that LPC jurisdiction still applies to historic districts and landmark buildings. And further, this map shows that solar is not necessarily viable everywhere. So while this could be a potential, there is potential for implementing this type of solar throughout the district, it is limited by the LPC process, as well as, taking an actual look at the actual physical rooftops that are present within the district where this type of solar could be installed. So my ultimate recommendations or next step are to just first and foremost promote awareness of the upcoming zoning changes in CB14 within the turnaround timeline that we currently have. My study really tried to frame looking at these districts and how could they be utilized to further the district's existing sustainability goals, especially as it pertains to implementing green infrastructure, which would benefit the whole district. And then my last recommendation is to develop a similar local impact analysis and mapping exercise for the other upcoming City of Yes initiatives as it relates to the economic development proposal and the housing opportunity proposal. And that's the end of my very choppy presentation. I'm really sorry for the technical difficulties throughout, but very open to questions, discussions, and any comments.
Thank you, Morgan. And no apologies necessary. I think your points definitely got across very clearly. So thank you for that. All right. So at this time, we'll take questions of Morgan based on her report, and any questions that you may have at this point regarding the text amendments. As we mentioned, the review period has commenced, and we'll have the opportunity to discuss this further next month. But certainly based on Morgan's research, if there are any questions or comments, we'll entertain them at this time. I had one question regarding the solar rooftops. It sort of went back fast there, so I wasn't sure. Is there a square footage requirement there, or they removed the square footage requirement?
Yeah, there is. Let me get back to that slide. Oops. Yeah. So if the installations would have to be less than 10,000 square feet.
Okay.
To be as of right.
All right, that makes sense.
And then it's also probably worth noting that there's a number of other, I think there are 2 other proposals that are kind of more related to the way that the solar would actually be installed and the height limitations. But again, that wasn't the focus of this analysis.
Understood. Okay, so I see Sean, if you're raising your hand, so please.
Thanks. First of all, thank you, Morgan. This is a really serious and wonkerific presentation, and I appreciate just how much work you put into it and how seriously you took the task on with. Also, you know, you did a lot of extra work too, and it kind of leads to my question. I know that you attended or you familiarized yourself with the borough president's comprehensive plan, and I'm wondering, even if not specifically, if just generally you have a sense of how much they relate to one another in terms of tying to health outcomes as well.
Yeah, I don't have a great answer for that question. I like you just sort of mentioned I don't have any direct references to the latest version of the comprehensive plan that's been released. Other than, I think there is overlap in that a lot of these initiatives, specifically the stormwater, specifically creating more street trees, aside from the impact that has on flooding, the impact that it has on mitigating urban heat island effect and other sort of compounding issues that come, from sustainable, resilient urban environments, but no kind of direct ties that I'm prepared to dive into.
Fair enough. Thanks for a great report.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Steve Cohen, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. I was looking at the list of items, and number 10 looked interesting, but I was having trouble deciphering exactly what it meant. Could you
Yeah, sure.
go back to that? And yeah, the charge sharing one, I wasn't really following what that meant.
Yeah, so I have very kind of high level understanding of the other ones just from listening to the information section, the information sessions that DCP hosted. As it relates to electric vehicle charging stations, I believe this proposal is in regard to allowing, if there's a residential charging station, for that, that's kind of zoned to be for residential use, to allow for more flexibility for that to be used for car sharing or even commercial use. I know a couple DCP people are on this call, so if you want to opine and correct me, but I think that's the general gist of number 10.
I guess, well, I understand you, maybe the other folks can pop in, but like I at my house, I have an electric vehicle charging station in my driveway. So is the idea that would be opened up to the public, or and then I'd be paying for other people to charge their vehicles, or are you talking about like a public charging in residential areas like that? I guess I'm just a little unclear on what you mean by that.
So we'll definitely make sure to clarify this when we present in June. To start, I'll say that proposal 10 is mostly related to multi-family residential developments that have required parking spaces, and allowing a portion of those required parking spaces. So this is in like larger apartment building developments, to be accessible to the public instead of just accessory to the residents in that building. It's also not a requirement, so it wouldn't make anyone have to make a private residential parking space accessible to the public, but it would allow a portion of parking spaces to be made available to the public. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's helpful to understand that it's basically for multi or apartments or buildings that have garages and things like that. So that's helpful to understand the intent.
Does anybody know if this also refers to the parking spaces in the public right-of-way that aren't metered, that are on residential street? That there are proposals and maybe even areas, maybe even installations already in the city. That was how residential parking spaces, I didn't read it as being on private property, but in the public right-of-way, putting the charging stations there. I don't know if this refers to that.
Yeah, so this is not referring to that. That's DOT jurisdiction.
Okay.
Really, like this is getting back to the wonkiness, but the zoning code in New York City applies to tax lots. So it's things that are happening on property. The street is public and it's not subject to zoning, subject to DOT jurisdiction. So the electric vehicle related proposals that you're seeing here are all related to lots, not on the street. The idea here is that that's where we have jurisdiction as the Department of City Planning, and also that we want to kind of unlock these private parking spaces that exist and make them publicly accessible for charging, in order to make electric vehicles more feasible in the city.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And just to follow up on that question, then I know that there are, there are entities that have sort of seized the opportunity to try to install electric stations on private properties, predominantly, I'd say, in shopping centers and other, commercial, on other commercial properties. Is this are the proposals here also designed to try to facilitate those projects moving forward, to try to get them deployed in a more expeditious fashion, I'd say?
Yeah, so that is, your question relates to proposal number 9 on this slide.
Okay.
And we'll talk about that more in detail when we come to present.
Okay, fair enough. Steve, I still see your hand up, so did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I guess going back to the items that you were focusing on, I did have a question about solar. You mentioned the historic districts and how they have restrictions, and that we have multiple historic districts in our community district. I guess, do we have any idea, like, the extent to which, there are folks who live in historic districts and are interested in getting solar, but are dissuaded from, all the hoops they'd have to jump through to do so, and the restrictions, and what if there's reasonable things that could be changed, and if so, if that would actually have a result of folks adopting solar to a noticeable degree.
Yes, I think this was, we actually discussed this very recently when we met with DCP. For the proposal that I focused on, currently LPC process would still apply to any building in a historic district. So, this wouldn't be an override of the LPC process. I believe that, there are discussions going on about how the LPC, how sustainability interventions in buildings and, building technology could be better integrated into their process, but I'm not aware of the specifics of how that might play out or the timeline for what that might look like.
And Steve, I have a call in, and hopefully we'll get, and it certainly will get an answer before the DCP presentation, but trying to find out if if the Landmarks Preservation Commission is anticipating or considering certificates of appropriateness in the districts versus for individual homeowners. So maybe we'll have more light shed on that by then.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. And yeah, I know it was noted in the chat, but just to state it for everyone as well, that Emily Bachman, who's spoken a few times, is from DCP and is spearheading these amendments. So thank you, Emily, for joining us. Okay, we'll entertain any further questions at this time, or else we will go ahead and move on to our next presenter this evening, and thank Morgan profusely for all of her work this year on this project. So with that, I will thank you on behalf of all of us, and I will turn it over now to Talisha to lead us forward with our next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Greg, and thank you, Morgan. Did you get to Elizabeth's comment?
You know what?
In the chat?
I was going to, but I thought so. Please go ahead.
Okay. I don't know if Elizabeth, yes, Elizabeth is still here. So Elizabeth said in the chat, this might be more of a question for DCP to discuss more when you come back in June, but wanted to get it on the radar. I understand that eliminating parking mandates are discussed in City of Housing Opportunity, but just wondering if there was any movement on the corresponding zoning amendments regarding that, as the way parking mandates incentivize personal car usage increases carbon emissions. So I don't know if Emily or Hanif, if either of you want to, or Morgan, if anybody wants to sort of respond to that.
Or if it's something that you can take into consideration for the June 8th presentation.
Yeah, I'll say so. That is something that we're looking at in zoning for housing opportunity, which is the third of the 3 City of Yes zoning text amendments. We've got some time before we get to that. It's not included at all in zoning for carbon neutrality. And I believe the current timeline for the housing opportunity package is like to certify around early 2024. So it is something the agency is looking at. It's not part of what's on the table right now for review.
Thank you.
Morgan, did you want to add something? Oh, no, I thought you were resharing to add.
Yeah, I just flashed up the timeline from one of the DCP slides that I had included at the beginning of my presentation that sort of showed the estimated timeline for the Housing for Opportunity initiative, which aligned with exactly what Emily just said.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again, Morgan, for your great reporting. So now we're going to move on to Lucy Phillips, and Lucy is currently with the Fund for the City of New York Planning, is currently the Fund for the City of New York Planning Fellow for CB14, and she is here tonight to report on the context and the status of Newkirk Plaza. I'll let Lucy give you a little bit more detail about what else she's up to and whatever else she'd like to comment about yourself. So Lucy, take it away.
Can you all hear me? Yeah, thank you so much, Alicia. Really appreciate that. Morgan, that was amazing. We're both fellows along with someone else, Bill, for CB14 this past year, and it's been an incredible experience, as I'm sure you can all guess, working with CB14. So let's see if I can share my screen, and hopefully it will go smoothly. But as Morgan showed us, sometimes it doesn't even matter if it doesn't. Okay, let's see. It's opening up my system preferences. Hold on one second. Here we go. This is what happens when we're used to using Zoom or something. Hold on.
Yeah, this might be WebEx not playing nicely.
It might also be just an Adobe problem, because I know that later on this afternoon, my Adobe was acting up as well. So it might be an Adobe problem.
So it looks like I may have to log back out of Cisco WebEx and then log back on. So I will be back in 1 minute. Apologies, and see you all soon. Please don't go anywhere.
We'll be here.
Awesome.
So while we're waiting for Lucy to come back, can you just tell us, Morgan, are you gonna continue working on this, the City of Yes, along with tracking the same things that you have been tracking? Is there anything more that you're gonna be doing with this, or anything different?
Yeah,
in the
so
coming
the
months?
the fellowship actually ended this, it was just for this school year. So sadly, my work with CB14 will come to an end soon, but I personally will definitely continue following. I think it's super interesting, and I think, the carbon neutrality initiatives is one of 3, and I'm really hopeful. I think, Sean had indicated or hinted that there might be another fellow or 2 in the pipeline in subsequent years. So hopefully, if this provides even just a starting framework for someone to tackle some of the other upcoming initiatives and do maybe a similar analyses, then hopefully that they have a good starting point. And again, Beta NYC was a really helpful resource. I would just reiterate, and I know they do a lot of work with community boards on this type of kind of spatial analyses. So I'm not sure how the arrangement would work, but they were really great, and I know they do a lot of work with community boards.
Okay, that's great. Well, it was great to have you.
It was really great. It was an awesome experience.
Yeah. So Lucy, you're back and you're up and running. So you're muted, Lucy. So
Had to get out of screen share in order to unmute. Hold on one second again. Okay, you can see the screen, you can hear me, all good? Awesome. Well, thank you all again for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time to listen in on our presentations. It's been an incredible year, as I said a little bit earlier, working with CB14 and getting to meet people in the community. So it really means a lot. I'm Lucy Phillips. I'm pursuing my MS in environmental policy here at the New School in Manhattan. And I also live in the district, so I feel like I've seen a lot of your faces around. I'm in Kensington, and I love this area. I love this community. So this was definitely a project that was very close to my heart, especially since it was focused on Newkirk Plaza, which I use every day, as I know many of you likely do as well, or at least pass by it. So I was lucky enough to get to work with CB14 on this project, really kind of focusing on how to determine jurisdiction and to provide information to the community on Newkirk Plaza. And I'm going to give you a kind of a similar presentation to what I gave to the fellowship a few weeks ago. That being said, I know many of you are likely aware of some of the information that will be in the first slides, but I wanted to kind of give you an understanding about how I've been contextualizing the situation at Newkirk Plaza in order to really convey its importance. So, context. Newkirk Plaza is located in Community District 14 in South Brooklyn at the nexus of the Flatbush, Midwood, and parts of Kensington neighborhoods. You can see on this little Google Maps screenshot that there's a little bit of green space to the north, Prospect Park, and then there's some to the southeast and southwest, but the district itself has very little open, accessible green public space, as you can see on this map. And in fact, as I'm sure many of you know, it ranks 59th out of 59 districts in terms of walkability and access to open public green space. So that kind of brings us to what Newkirk Plaza is and why it's so important. So it's an essential community, economic, and transportation center connecting all of these neighborhoods and the rest of the city. It's widely known as the first outdoor mall in America, as it officially opened in 1910. And you can see in this top photo that this is the railway being built in 1907, which is pretty incredible that we have all of these archival images of these types of things happening. And then the open air Newkirk Plaza BQ Express subway stop runs below the plaza, which is shown here in this bottom photo. And so the east and west side buildings are zoned for this commercial overlay with residential areas, which is what we see. There are 34 different retail spaces ranging from cafes to florists, drugstores, and a couple of banks. And then above those stores are apartments that are only accessible outside of the plaza. So essentially, Newkirk Plaza is completely closed to through traffic, and it operates as a pedestrian plaza with this kind of retail and transportation access. So importantly, CB14 requested this project not because of what Newkirk Plaza is, but more so because of what it is not. So the plaza itself, the space between the east and west side stores, is technically an unmapped city lot, as you can see here in this Sanborn map atlas, and no city agency has it under its jurisdiction. So for decades, city agencies have refuted ownership and responsibility claims, kind of volleying responsibility back and forth, which means that a bunch of basic services are not met. The following four main issues have been included in community district needs reports and are widely cited by community members and merchants alike. I can attest that I would also kind of cite some of these as the main issues at Newkirk Plaza. So first is sanitation. DSNY, the Department of Sanitation, will not and cannot go into the plaza since it's not under the purview of a city agency. And so a local development organization, the Flatbush Development Corps, has a city grant to essentially collect the trash and then place it on the sidewalks outside of the plaza for collection, which is kind of like a lot of hoops to jump through in order to have a basic service being met. And secondly, there is no one agency to apply to for permitting. And so the permitting for community events is limited and is just kind of a huge shame for use of public space that it's difficult to get community permits. It just seems like that should be something readily available to all public spaces. Third, there are multiple possible agencies to apply to for funding opportunities, but these are one-off grants and don't address the ongoing need for maintenance, new projects, and upgrades, including the need to make this kind of a greener space that provides adequate shade on hot days and cleaner air to breathe right above a subway station. And then lastly, and I think in some ways most importantly, or at least is the issue that I've heard kind of more complaints about again and again from various community members, is safety. When the lights go out at the plaza, often it is the merchants themselves who change them. When it snows, MTA will shovel, 3 feet around the subway entrance, but then the rest of the plaza is left icy. There are also 2 vacant property lots at the north and southeast ends of the plaza that have been under construction for years. And there is a persistent unhoused community that historically has not been that responsive to outreach. And so all of these issues have created this kind of no man's land mentality for Newkirk Plaza, where problems are only addressed piecemeal and the need for consistent services is consistently unmet. So in having these conversations with CB14 and also with Flatbush Development Corps, who I met with many times over the course of this fellowship, it became clear that this project was really two-pronged. First was to try and figure out how to get a city agency to take over jurisdiction of the plaza. And from my various research and conversations, I really do think the best route forward is to designate Newkirk Plaza an official pedestrian plaza under the Department of Transportation's program. Doing so would bring much needed money and services to the plaza without requiring any sort of traffic survey or worries about adverse impacts on parking availability. It's already a pedestrian plaza, just not one officially under the plaza program. And then secondly is to provide a community landing page for information about Newkirk Plaza and what's been going on there. Over the years, there have been numerous 311 complaints, emails, and calls from concerned community members wondering what's going on with the plaza. I've created a Newkirk Plaza website that includes an introduction, a history and timeline, a vision of what it could be under this pedestrian plaza program, a petition for community members to show their support, and a merchant map that acts as a directory for the plaza stores, which is important because if you go on Google Maps, you actually can't see all of the different stores that are at Newkirk Plaza. So as some of you may have seen, and I saw in the chat that someone highlighted, there is a new website at CB14. They've completely overhauled it and it looks fantastic. So as they're in the process of migrating over all of these pages, once that's finished, we'll create and publish the Newkirk Plaza website pages. So I have them all outlined and I've met with CB14 to discuss how they will be implemented, but they aren't ready yet. But we're hoping to have those out to you all and to the public sometime by summer. So hopefully soon, stay tuned, and I will make sure that you all get a link to that when it is done. And so my approach and methodology in order to kind of respond to these two main issues of jurisdiction and disseminating Newkirk Plaza information, I had to do two other things. And first, I reviewed CB14's treasure trove of documents, photos, meeting notes, property maps, and deeds going back to the 1850s, which I can tell you was honestly a true delight. It was pretty incredible to be able to look through all of this incredible history of the neighborhood that I live in, but also just of Brooklyn in general, and getting to see so much of this, so many of these documents was pretty special. And I also looked at sources from various other places in order to understand ownership, the plaza's origins, what's happened there in the last 150 years. And this photo at the top actually is an advertisement for the plaza retail spaces from the early 1910s, which I just thought was kind of cool. And then secondly was to have as many meetings as possible with as many different people as possible, including attending a Newkirk Plaza merchants meeting, which you can see at the bottom here. And so through doing all of this document review and having all these conversations and meetings with various stakeholders, I was able to create a timeline and narrative of the plaza, how it came to be, what went wrong, and how to move forward based on what the community wants and I think it needs as well. Okay, so my findings, of course, build on decades of research and community efforts to affect change at Newkirk Plaza. This is just a snapshot of the website timeline that highlights the history and importance of it. So it's been 118 years since the Brooklyn Rapid Transit, which was the MTA's predecessor entity, obtained easements from property owners along the proposed tracks so that an express station with 4 tracks rather than 2 could service the area. It's been 48 years since the Flatbush Development Corporation formed, and it's fought for Newkirk Plaza in the community ever since. It's been 39 years at least since city agencies were first made aware of persistent issues with sanitation, cleanliness, and lighting at the plaza. It has been 28 years since the official lease was last amended by the city. So this states that the city owns the property and that the New York City Transit Authority leases the land from them. It's been 15 years since 601 Marlborough, the lot at the north end of the plaza, was last occupied. It's been 11 years since CB14 first asked DOT to consider pedestrian plaza status. It's been 3 years since Eric Adams, then Brooklyn Borough President, sent a letter to then Mayor de Blasio asking for the matter of Newkirk Plaza's jurisdiction to finally be resolved. And lastly, it's been 1 year since the FDC officially applied for pedestrian plaza status from the Department of Transportation. They still haven't heard back. And I think that last point is really indicative of the whole situation of Newkirk Plaza, where agencies just continually volley this responsibility back and forth, meaning that the plaza and the community itself are really just left in limbo. So these additional findings also serve as my recommendations to CB14 going forward. First, I think it's important for DOT and NYCTA to come together to review the lease terms, focusing on ensuring that the plaza is a recognizable domain. Since the most recent amended lease we have is from 1995, there is a big question of whether the lease is on a year-to-year basis and what that means for the plaza. And then secondly, I think that a ULURP process should be initiated to remap Newkirk Plaza as a public space under the jurisdiction of an agency, which hopefully would mean that these services that are currently not being met actually would be met. And I think the important point on both of these two is that these agencies have to come together and actually agree on an outcome. Otherwise, this no man's land status of Newkirk Plaza will only continue. And then a few more considerations that I had just kind of going through this entire process. One, I'm kind of wondering if the city is spending its money wisely in terms of giving out short-term grants for basic services that should already be provided to Newkirk Plaza. Secondly, this is public space, yet with the lack of agency oversight, what's stopping a private developer from taking over the plaza? For instance, 601 Marlborough has stood empty since 2008. Maybe the owner is waiting for an opportunity to buy up more of the plaza. This is, of course, just a conjecture, but something we really need to think about is how and why public space exists, and especially with a community district that so desperately needs public outdoor space. And then lastly, I think that this whole situation also makes the city vulnerable to potential lawsuits, especially when so many have worked tirelessly over decades to ascertain plaza jurisdiction with no real answer or decision ever made. Ultimately, Newkirk Plaza has major historical, community, economic, and transportation importance. The community deserves to have an outdoor, green, public space to convene. And I really do think that the DOT's pedestrian plaza program could make Newkirk Plaza not just a place to walk through, but a place to walk to. Thank you. And open for
Thank you very much, Lucy. That was very interesting. I guess we'll open it up to any questions that anybody might have. I see that this is your contact information on the screen here in case anybody wants to contact you directly. Or of course, you can always contact the community board, to discuss more about what was said tonight. And we'll get that information over to Lucy. So Barden, I saw your hand up first. So why don't you go ahead?
I'll defer to Greg though, if you want to start.
Oh no, go ahead. Please.
Oh no, go ahead, please.
Okay. I love the idea of us trying to kickstart something using ULURP, but I saw your asterisk at the bottom saying that it's entirely dependent upon transit and DOT coming to an agreement first. We couldn't force the issue by trying to start the ULURP.
Sorry, muted. Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not exactly sure if that, I think that I know that we can start the process of a ULURP without them coming to the table and talking. And I think that that process actually has been started very prematurely, if I'm not incorrect, Sean. But I think my point about both of those needing DOT and MTA to come together is that ultimately they will have to in order for something to actually change. But we, CB14 can start that ULURP process, and I think should before they come together.
I think that's great. I would highly encourage us to pursue that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next, Greg, and then Steve. You'll go after Greg.
Okay, whichever. Thank you. And Lucy, great presentation. So the question I had, because I looked at some of those documents as well to see what the answer might be, and for me it was always there's this gap between the initial easements that were granted by the property owners, and then fast forward many decades, and then the next document is this lease that acknowledges the ownership by the city. So basically, what that implies then is that somewhere in that intervening time, the title to the property transferred from the from the owners that owned adjacent and then granted their easement rights to the city taking over. I don't know. Did you find any evidence of what may help to connect the dots there in terms of that jump, where there is some acknowledgement that the city actually owns it? However, doesn't seem to be anything in the record where it shows that, because I guess when the cut came through, those properties were still the right of way that was created was still owned by the property owners that had pre-existed there. So I don't know, was there anything in your discussions or in the research that may have shed light on that? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, and I've seen you on a couple of the emails that I've reviewed, so I know that you're intimately involved with a lot of this as well. That's the meat of it, right? That the reason why these agencies are able to continually say it's not ours, it's theirs, it's not ours, it's not theirs, is that at least from what I've reviewed, there are some missing documents or some missing information. I wish I could tell you that I came across this one thing and it was like, this is the answer, but I didn't. And I think that's why these agencies have kind of gotten away with being able to say, this is our responsibility, we have to move on this. It is clear that these easements that were all granted in the late 1800s, or maybe originally, I think in 1903 to about 1915, 1920. So that was after much of the railroad was actually built and after the plaza itself was built as the retail access above the plaza or above the subway opened in 1910. So some easements were even being allowed and presented after most of this was already built. I think the thing with those is that period between about, I think 1925 is potentially the last easement that we have access to, and 1953 when that lease was first started, that's where I've seen the least amount of information. I could probably do some digging to figure out why that is. I don't know why we don't really have as much information for those 25-year period, although I could, make some guesses. But I think that's it right there. I would really suggest, and I'm not sure if anyone has talked with him yet, but Joe Enright, who is a community member as well, and is, I think, a former lawyer and has really spent a fair amount of time going through the history of this area. He runs a blog that also discusses this. Many of you may be aware of him. He has a very good understanding of the easements and that entire process that I couldn't begin to compare to his understanding, especially because it's from a legal standpoint, which I just don't have. So I think if it's something that you think would be helpful, I think he would be a great person to talk with. But yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, Greg. That's the issue right there, I think.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, because that's that great article that Joe has with the sort of selling Newkirk Plaza. I saw the name underneath. It was like CF Bond. I wonder who that was, in terms of the, sort of the cheerleader to get Newkirk Plaza off the ground. So
he was a huge character. He was essentially the one that pulled for the easement. So without CF Bond, the entire easements probably wouldn't have happened, which means that Newkirk Plaza probably would not have been a express stop. And he was also the one that kind of came up with the idea to have a pedestrian plaza with the apartment access only outside of the plaza. And doing so meant that the storefronts could be wider, which of course meant that landlords could charge higher rent, but also meant that the ways that aesthetically that the storefronts looked like just looked more cohesive. So he was definitely a big player in the Newkirk Plaza and development in the neighborhood overall.
Interesting. So he probably owns some of the property, I would imagine.
He did, yes.
Okay.
We have some of his easements, I believe, as well.
Got it. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, thank you. Steve, you're up next.
So much. Thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. The one thing I wasn't entirely following was the, I guess maybe the last thing you covered, which was possible litigation. I wasn't following what type of litigation you were referring to there.
Definitely. So because this, I'm trying to go back to the actual slide too. Maybe that's less important, but oh, here we go. So because there has been so many questions of jurisdiction, and because the FDC, the Flatbush Development Corporation, has continually tried to determine jurisdiction over the plaza for a number of years and has applied for this pedestrian plaza status, but just simply has not heard back, which is not typical. I'm pretty sure every other, although I don't have that information for you 100%, pretty sure everyone else who applied for that status has heard back. And so it's this thing where it feels a lot like Newkirk Plaza often just gets ignored or tabled because people don't want to deal with it because they see it as a liability or asset liability issue. So the idea with the lawsuit, which is probably not appealing to anyone, including any of these community groups, would be that they could potentially file a lawsuit against the city for not doing anything about this public space that they clearly have ownership over. So that's where that comes in. I say that because, yeah, I don't think that that's a path they would want to take. I haven't brought this up with FDC specifically because they do, get money from the city and they have a lot of relationships with them. And so I don't think it's a route that they would likely take, but I do think that it's something that kind of needs to be in the conversation when talking about this public space, is that the city has opened itself up to a lot of potential lawsuits from various community groups for their lack of action on Newkirk Plaza as a public space that they own, at least somewhat.
Does that clear things up for you, Steve? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Sean, you. Oh.
Sorry,
Sean, you have your hand up. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, and Article 78 would be the filing, and I bring it up to FTC all the time. In other other groups too. I mean, because it is sort of sitting pretty for taking it down that path. We used to also sort of wonder, Robin Redmond from FTC and I, if there was a trip and fall, not wishing anyone harm. But then, of course, the answer is that claim comes out of the comptroller's office, that it wouldn't settle jurisdiction. And Lucy, I want to thank you, much in the same way as Morgan. You took this project on with so much enthusiasm. You went above and beyond, the minimum that could have still made this a good report, and reached out and made it a great report. And I appreciate how much you felt it the whole way. I don't know, have we cried together? I think we may have even cried together. But I just want to emphasize the other jurisdictional problem is that you make this, the short-term grants or services, it is totally dependent on the benevolence of the sitting mayor. And we happen to have a mayor now who's from Brooklyn and who, as borough president, tried to convene the stakeholders together to hold them accountable. And now as mayor is committed to trying to make stuff happen there, but it's all through FDC grants and that sort of thing. So the jurisdictional issue really secures the sanitation and events and all of the things that city services, all of the city services that should be granted at a city site. So thanks again for the work. I can't wait to add it to the website. Thanks for working on that too. Another like extra credit project within this project, but it's great. I appreciate it all.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, I mean, I think it seems kind of like we're at this inflection point where, as Sean just mentioned, Mayor Adams was the person who was part of these efforts just 3 years ago to really try and make something happen and make a final decision on the jurisdiction issue at Newkirk Plaza. Yet nothing has really happened. And that's kind of like the cycle that Sean has been a part of, that many of you have been a part of for so many years. And it's like, with this timeline, how long is this timeline going to go on? How much longer are they going to keep just kind of ignoring their responsibility to this public space, especially in a community that really needs it and really deserves it? And so I think that for all of this like city of yes, it really feels like a no to Newkirk Plaza, and it's frustrating. And I think I'm really hoping that the more people we talk with and the more people who become aware of this project, at least they can't say they don't know what's going on there. Because I will tell you, many of the conversations I had with Brooklyn Borough Hall that Sean was a part of, with some of the other government officials, they didn't even know about Newkirk Plaza. They didn't know where it was. They didn't even know there wasn't even a place to have an issue about, because they didn't know that it was placed, right? And so I think that's a huge problem. I think that highlighting this area, not just for its like historical importance, but also its community importance, is really big. And at one of those meetings, Brooklyn Borough Hall said, this seems like a small town issue. I can't believe that this is happening here in Brooklyn. And Sean and I kind of looked at each other like, yeah, it's happening here in Brooklyn. Like, let's do something about this. Like, this is not just some small town issue. This is serious and this is big. And it also just opens up the possibility for these things to happen in other places. And I think we can't really accept that for public spaces any longer. So thank you, Sean, for going on this journey with me.
Yeah, can I add to that? Because another comment that stayed with me in that meeting was the current borough president, land use staff said, "Ooh, we don't like when land isn't claimed because, so because this is such a preposterous issue, sometimes I think of preposterous solutions like, what if somebody comes along and proposes a 26-story building on Newkirk Plaza? Who would claim it then?" But that did resonate with me. MTA says that their assets are below grade. So the above grade is vulnerable.
Greg, you have a question, comment?
Just to Sean's point, I mean, do we know who, like just going back to the origins, do we know who built the pedestrian plaza itself? We know that, when the cut came in, but do we know who built the plaza at the beginning?
I mean, that's a good question about the physical construction. I have some documents at least that could shed light on that. It was built in the process of the railroad being built. So that was obviously BRT, Brooklyn Rapid, which is an MTA predecessor entity, that built that. And they decided that they wanted it to be open air on purpose to be able to have this space above, and in order to create more areas for development. So either way, I know that what was MTA was definitely involved in that construction. And we know that too, because of the actual pillars that, hold up the plaza, that those are MTA property. But I can find out more. I can look back a little bit at my documents and see if I can ascertain maybe who was actually doing that kind of building for that. Or I know at least Joe Enright would have a good answer.
All right, thanks.
So I have a sort of question. I'm wondering if you can maybe elaborate a little bit more on whether or not, because you had on that last slide that it's a possibility. One of the possibilities is to make this space a privately owned space. So do you know who owns 601 over there, and if they own other properties on Newkirk Plaza, and what would stop, like, let's say, a private developer from just sort of taking over the plaza, or at least, you know, one developer on one side and then another developer taking over the other side, and sort of taking ownership? Is there some kind of would there be a problem, I guess?
Yeah,
With
huge problem.
huge problem.
I know Sean will definitely speak to this as well, because we've had many conversations about this, and she is one of the reasons why I know about this. But the landlord who owns 601 Marlboro also owns the former Santander Bank lot, like at the southeast in the plaza. So both those vacant lots are owned by the same landlord, and he's part of a family of real estate owners and developers that own other buildings throughout Brooklyn. So as we have discussed in the past, Sean, it seems like there is really no incentive for this landlord to build there, because he maybe doesn't need the money or doesn't need the income. And so for me, at least, this poses a huge question of what happens if then they get excited and a bunch of leases go up, a bunch of people want to sell their area, and they just decide that they want to buy up all of those stores along Newkirk Plaza. That could happen, as far as my understanding. Of course, I don't have, again, the legal background of that, but I do believe that that is possible. Or that they could just keep these lots empty forever. I mean, it's private land, right? Like those lots are privately owned. So there's no way that we can say you must do this. So I think that that is a huge issue. And Sean, I'm sure you could add more color to that.
Actually, it's weird. The lots sort of face out to the street, from the building line to the street. So from the back of the building, which is the front of Newkirk Plaza, that would, on a regular city map, that would be the backyards, but it doesn't. But the property line doesn't extend. It's the plaza itself is sort of what's in no man's land, and then the building line forward to the Marlborough Road and East 16th Street, those are the lots. So they're weird, they're weird. There's no backyard in these buildings, or there's no frontage on the Newkirk Plaza side. The corner buildings are different, and that's why those two spaces look a little bit different, and maybe, but I also don't remember the zoning map there, but that would also limit what could be done. But I've never thought of that, Talisha. Like, what if somebody just buys 4 or 5, 6 buildings in a row and then redevelops them? That's curious.
Well, then I guess I also wonder, is it worth it as a part of just sort of understanding maybe some of the thought process about the current maybe 601 developer, and where the Santander bank used to be? If it's worth it to sort of have a conversation with them in order to understand a little bit more about what they're doing with the property, like,
That sort of
are
opens
they
it's a can of worms, and FDC has tried to engage them many times, because they're also like part of the Merchants Association, and maybe Lucy, you have more insight than I do, but the owner does not play nicely in the sandbox, is not interested in engagement, and actually you've got Ken Lazar from DOB here. DOB was instrumental in the 601 site. Ken and I spoke a lot about that site, and DOB had to call in their legal department in order to address the errant building, or actually it was a demo. I think it was a demo without permit or beyond the scope of the permit. And then we had some concerns about the integrity of the transit, the rails as it went down to transit in the transit house. So they're extremely difficult.
So if I can join in this conversation, I mean, this is what my thinking is boy, I can't imagine how difficult it is to build on these lots because there has to be, you know, the buildings that are there are pre-existing current code, and then you'd have to come up to code, and then you're dealing with MTA property, which is so directly adjacent. I would imagine that would be, you know, pretty impossible to put something up very big.
I don't know if Ken Lazar wants to
Situation
comment
like a
on
real
that.
possible situation for somebody to develop. Yeah. So that's my input. It just seems a little impossible to build in a safe and sort of expeditious manner. Again, you know, in the north of the district, I'm surrounded by development. I'm looking at this. Wow, that looks hard.
Sorry, you're kind of cutting in and out a little bit there, so I didn't catch everything that you said, but yeah, I don't know if Ken Lazar wants to comment on that at all, but I would think that, you know, if you because since those are businesses there, that it's not that difficult to, let's say, you know, renovate those and bring those up to code. But you know, I imagine at the corners, you know, there's a lot more to do if they want to build up a substantial apartment building. But that's, I guess, a consideration about it. Does anybody else have anything else that they want to have a question for Lucy, have a comment that they want to put out there? Okay, well, seeing no hands, thank you very much, Lucy. I think that you've given us I love seeing all those historic photos from back in the day, and I didn't know that was Newkirk Plaza the first outdoor mall in America?
Claim to fame, first outdoor mall.
There should be a plaque somewhere.
Great.
Figure out what agency puts it up.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe that's it. Maybe we go to Landmarks with it, and then Landmarks will then.
And then they really can't build
that. Okay, well, thank you very much. I don't know if Greg, if you had anything else that you wanted to add. So I guess at 8 o'clock, we can end it right there. Thank you again, Lucy. That was a great presentation, and you know, now I'm percolating about Newkirk Plaza in a completely different way. So thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that it's a good idea to have a sort of landing page on the CB14 website to, you know, just learn a little bit more and sort of track it a little bit more, because I think that this is going to become something that the entire district is going to be, you know, more gravitating towards. Sean, did you want to say something?
I just, before we conclude, I did want to, Morgan will be sharing her deck, and so that will be on the website. And Lucy, before we open up your whole page, can we put your deck on the Planning Fellows portion of the website?
Of course.
Good. So we'll have the information there, but I do want to encourage people, and we'll get the word out, to take a look at Morgan's deck prior to June 8th when we meet with DCP, and we'll try to post other DCP resources, you know, because they've had some listening sessions, and I'll see what's available from them, so that because we do have such a tight turnaround on this, given our schedule and their deadline, maybe a little homework before June. And so we can kind of hit the ground running when they present on June 8th. So we'll try to gather that all together in an organized fashion. But again, thank you to Lucy and Morgan. Really, just stellar reports. Really, really good, both of you.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody for joining us tonight. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.